Welcome to episode number 44 of Hoop Talk Fanatics. I am here with Indiana men's basketball reporter Jack Grossman, recapping an interesting Michigan State-Indiana game that happened tonight. And I'm interested to hear what Jack's thoughts are. So welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It was definitely definitely an interesting one up in East Lansing tonight, obviously with all the emotion of everything going on there. That's obviously going to be the main story from a national perspective. The tragedy obviously from last week, but there was a basketball game on the court that is pretty meaningless in the grand context of things, but it's a nice distraction, I think, for most people from that standpoint.
What were your initial thoughts on how the game uh, went? Went?
Well, I'll put it this way. I thought, Indiana came out really well. They're playing with energy, emotion, intensity. They're up 22-13. I really thought the game was decided with about 6:14 left in the first half. And Jalen Hood-Schifino, Indiana's point guard, gets a second foul. Mike Woodson puts him on the bench. You look at throughout the season, Mike Woodson's been fairly aggressive, playing guys with 2 fouls in the first half. Ken Palm has a nice stat on it. Woodson's done that about 30% of the time, which is the 88th highest percentage in college basketball. But he makes the decision to sit Jalen Hood-Schifino down. I use up 9 points at this point. They're playing well. You know a counterpunch is going to come from Michigan State at some point because they're a good team. They're playing at home. Again, there's all the emotion, all that stuff. The atmosphere was nuts up there in Breslin. But the decision to leave Jalen Hood-Schifino on the bench, I get it, you take him out at first, but once Tyson Walker hits a couple threes, he hit 3 in a row at one point, the crowd kind of gets going, your lead gets trimmed down to like 3-4 points. At that point, you put your point guard back in, you let him go, you take the risk with the fouls and say, look, we built up a lead the first 14 minutes of this game. We should probably try to hold it going into halftime. Mm-hmm. Instead, Woodson takes a risk of leaving Hood-Schifino on the bench, which Indiana still doesn't have Xavier Johnson, their original starting point guard of the season, due to injury. They don't really get a whole lot out of their bench, especially when they play on the road. So you're in a situation now where you're playing with Trey Galloway at the point, who's serviceable, but not exactly phenomenal at that point. He's playing out of position, to be quite honest, when he's playing the point. You're playing Tamar Bates, who in his last 64 minutes is giving you a total of 4 points and is missing assignments everywhere defensively, to where you're just not having the calming presence that you need in the backcourt when you're in East Lansing playing a really good Michigan State team. So the wheels fell off in the first half. IU got outscored 22-7 in the last 6:14 of the first half with Jalen Hood-Schifino on the bench the entire time. And to me, that's where the whole just atmosphere, the climax, just everything about that game changed in those 6 minutes and 14 seconds with Jalen Hood-Schifino on the bench. And that's something that, there's a lot of other reasons why Michigan State won the game, both in terms of things Sparty did well, things Indiana did not do well, but everything changed when Hood-Schifino went to the bench and Mike Woodson refused to put him back in the game.
What were your thoughts on how Trey Galloway and Hood-Schifino performed?
I mean, they were both fine. I mean, you look at the stats, Hood-Schifino at 16, he shot the ball pretty well. Only 1 turnover or something, Indiana had 14 on the game, so that wasn't exactly great on their part. They really got, from their 5 starters, the ESPN had the graphic up near the end of the game where IU starts that outscored Michigan State 57-54, but it was the bench that was really the issue there. It was 17-6 bench points on the game, 17-2 for most of the game. IU got a couple of garbage time free throws there on the bench, but Indiana's starting 5 wasn't really the problem. Trey Jackson-Davis wasn't his normal self, which is crazy to say considering he still had, 19 points, 7 boards, 5 assists, whatever the heck it was in the game. But obviously he struggled with the turnovers in this one. But Indiana got production out of their 5 starters. The issue was they're just not getting anything out of that bench right now. And that's something that's going to be a struggle until they get Xavier Johnson back. Even when they get him back, how effective can he be after missing at this point? He got injured December 17th against Kansas, where over 2 months, almost 9 weeks from that point now, to where how do you integrate him back in? Can he find a rhythm when he comes back in? Because Tamar Bates, you're not getting much from right now. Caleb Banks is a freshman who gives you some nice, effort and hustle, but isn't exactly going to score a lot at this point. Isn't a great spot up shooter at this point. CJ Gunn was supposed to be a great spot up shooter, but he's fallen out of the rotation. George Geronimo's battled some injuries to where he hasn't been the guy that people thought he was going to be. Malik Renew's giving you some stuff, but he's just, not what Indiana needs right now. He obviously brings post play and rebounding and effort with him when he can stay out of foul trouble. But Indiana's bench issues really come from the backcourt perspective right now. So that's where I feel like you couldn't ask much more from Hood-Schifino or Galloway today. They didn't turn the ball over too much. They shot the ball fairly well. Galloway gave you, 11 points, so using double figures. Anytime you get double figure points from him, it's fine. That their biggest issues were more on the defensive end, leaving shooters wide open, over helping, which when Indiana struggled defensively, it's really been off of over helping, off of the pick and roll, or ball movement, leaving guys wide open, or just having just straight up defensive lapses on the defensive end. So if you want to pick a bone with those two guys, it would be on the defensive end, just leaving shooters too often. And Michigan State was obviously on fire from three and completely burned IU from that point. But you're looking at why they lost the game. I'm not sure how much of it I'm pinning on the two of them. I'm looking more just, lack of production from the bench, and overall, not just the two of them, but the entire team not being able to defend the 3-point line, and just, a fatigue factor that I think has been there for Indiana for about 2.5, 3 weeks now. If you look back maybe towards the Rutgers game in early February, since that point, they've really just kind of been surviving more so than thriving, I would argue, because you survive against Michigan, a game that you really shouldn't have won, but you battled back from down 9 late in that game to win. You fall at Northwestern, a game that you were down 21, came all the way back, almost forced overtime to end up losing. And then you're down 11 against Illinois with 8-9 minutes left in that game and scratch and claw away to win that game. But you look at Indiana. Because they're not getting anything from the bench right now, they're playing their starters basically the whole game. Other than when Hood-Schifino was in foul trouble today, he's playing, 36, 37 minutes a game. Trayce Jackson-Davis only played 36 minutes tonight. Only is a key word there. And that's because Mike Woodson basically put him on the bench the last 3 minutes because the game was already out of reach. But you go back before that, he's playing 39, 40 minutes every single game. You just look at him, especially when he defends the pick and roll. Right now, he's one of, and this is something that the broadcast mentioned a lot about how bad he was defending the pick and roll tonight. But he's someone that's one of the best bigs in college basketball when it comes to defending in space, switching under guards, playing that drop coverage, whichever way Mike Woodson wants to play it that particular night, but defending the pick and roll and not giving up easy buckets off the pick and roll. You watch tonight, and part of this is Michigan State because Tyson Walker is phenomenal in the pick and roll. He's really, really good in the pick and roll. He's just a really spectacular player, but whether it was Walker or Hogard, they were able to blow by Jackson Davis over and over again tonight. And that's something that we really haven't seen from Trayce Jackson Davis really throughout his career, but especially this year. He's really done a good job defending in space. And he just looked a step slow a bunch of times in this one. And that's something that where, there's a 3-possession stretch in the second half where they found him for under the basket for a bunny that, he's automatic from. Like he makes it 10 out of 10 times over Jackson Kohler from about 2 feet out. He left it short. Next possession down, Michigan State runs a pick and roll, and Walker beats him, or it was Hogard actually beats him to the bucket and hits a layup. And Jackson Davis doesn't even jump to try to block the shot, which is rare. And then the next possession down, they throw it to him in the high post, and he ends up turning the ball over. And I thought that 3-possession stretch, which was when after IU got back within 5, Michigan State went on that 8-0 run to stretch things back out to double digits really for the rest of the game. That kind of showed like, okay, those are 3 plays in a row that we're not used to seeing from Trayce Jackson Davis. And that's something to where I think all the minutes he's playing, all the pressure that's on him, how much he gets used. Because Indiana plays their offense through him every single possession right now because they really don't have an option. I mean, you can play through Jalen Hood-Schifino sometimes, but other than that, I mean, Grace Thompson isn't going to create his own shot. Miller Kopp doesn't create his own shot. Trey Calloway does a little bit, but how does he create his own shot? Most of it is either off a zoom action or a high pick and roll with Jackson Davis. So you're still involving TJD in the play, and he's still initiating a lot of that initial offense to get Trey Calloway going. So where you're having to run everything through Trace on the offensive end, and then on the defensive end, Indiana plays really aggressive man-to-man defense, at least, when they're defending well, that's what they're doing. And it's putting a lot of pressure on Trace on the back end to block shots, which he does a great job of, and clean the mess up on the back end and rebound the ball, do all those things, to where they're asking him to do so much right now, and he's been able to come through and do it for so long that I think at this point, he might just be gassed right now. And again, we're saying this off of a game where he had 19 and 7. So, which is crazy to think about, but I think you look at Trace Jackson Davis and you say he needs help. So how do you get him that help? You need to find some time to get him on the bench. And I think Mike Woodson did a really smart thing in this game that he really hasn't taken advantage of nearly as often. He took Jackson Davis off before with 12:30 left in the second half, right before that under 12 media timeout, to try to buy him a couple of extra minutes there of time with the media timeout. Then they put him back in right after that. That's something he really hadn't done too much. And then the other thing, once you get Xavier Johnson back, I think you can play Trace Jackson Davis instead of 38, 39, 40 minutes a game. If you just steal 2-3 minutes in each half, get him to 34, 35 minutes a game, to where you could play Hood-Schifino and Johnson together, where you have two guys that can handle the ball and create their own shot, create shots for others. Play Malik Renew and Geronimo, or if you want to make Grace Thompson in there for Geronimo, that's fine also. But to where you can still, not at the same level that you do with Trace, but you can still post up Malik Renew and have a source of offense that way. And have, Miller Kopp in the corner like a Tamar Bates or a Galloway or someone, a shooting threat, to where you still have, even without Trace on the floor, you have in theory 2, maybe even 3 guys that can create their own shot. That's something Indiana doesn't have that luxury of right now without Xavier Johnson on the court. Now, when does Johnson come back? It's been very theorized the last couple weeks or so. He did participate in the shoot-around before the game on Tuesday. So that's, yes, he's getting closer, but obviously he still didn't dress or play in the game. It's been rumored maybe the Purdue game Saturday, maybe, the last 2 games Indiana has at home against Iowa and Michigan at the end of the year. But they need to get him back, and they need to let him play enough to where he can get into a rhythm before he gets to the Big Ten and NCAA tournaments. Because Indiana, they won 9 of their previous 11 before this game, but I really felt like they had kind of plateaued in what they were doing right now, because you could tell they've just been running out of gas with this. Teams are adjusting to what they've been doing, and they need a counterpunch, and they need to inject some more energy into their ball club. And I think the way they need to be able to do that is by getting Xavier Johnson back.
So my next question is, what do you think Indiana needs to improve heading into the biggest matchup of the season against Purdue?
Well, tonight it was the rebounding. I mean, Indiana is typically a fairly good rebounding team, but they were absolutely demolished on the boards today. I mean, I think they finished -9 on the boards. Yes, that's right. They were killed on the offensive glass as well. And there is no worse team to face when you're struggling to rebound the ball than Purdue, who may be the best rebounding team in the country. So Indiana's going to need a much better effort on the glass this time around than what they did tonight, and even what they did in the first matchup in Bloomington, which they were able to win. What offset that in the first game was Indiana forced 16 Purdue turnovers. They really fed off the crowd well. Purdue's guards were, quite frankly, rattled by the Assembly Hall crowd, especially in that first half of the first game. That's not going to happen in Mackey Arena, where they have their own home crowd that's going to be absolutely bonkers. But you got to be able to pressure the ball, push Purdue's offense out, and make it hard for them to get the ball into Zach Edey. That's what they're going to have to do. Dude, that's what they did so well for large stretches of the first game. They're going to have to do it again in Mackey Arena, which is a much tougher ask to do in than it was the first time around when IU was the home team, which it's weird that, home and road splits matter that much, but it really does. I mean, I saw the stat today. I mean, Big Ten teams in the month of February are 6-27 on the road. So it is not easy to get road wins this time of year. And it's an unfortunate schedule quirk that IU's playing 4 out of 5 games on the road during this stretch. And it's probably even more unfortunate that at a time when Indiana is so mentally and physically taxed, they're facing a Purdue team that has 6 days to prepare for them. That's not exactly ideal, but that's how the schedule goes. You can't control that. You can't use that as an excuse. But I think there is a path for Indiana to win the game. It's not a likely path in Mackey Arena because it's incredibly hard to win in Mackey Arena, and Purdue's role players typically play a lot better at Mackey Arena. But Purdue's going to play that drop coverage and pick and roll because that's what they always do with Zach Edey. And Hood Schifino is as good as anyone in the country at hitting that mid-range 15, 18-foot pull-up, especially when he's going to his right. And they burned Purdue over and over and over again on that action in the first game. And I think they're going to go to it again, whether it be, Purdue actually changed it a little bit because they switched Edey off of Trace. They started with Caleb first on Trace, and they were doubling. They couldn't guard him, so they switched Edey on him. They put Edey in pick and rolls. They couldn't guard Trace or Hood-Schifino, so they switched first and Gillis back onto Trace. So when Indiana would run that pick and roll in the second half with Trace and Hood-Schifino, they were hedging it instead of playing drop coverage when Edey was in the action, which disrupted Indiana's offense a little bit. But IU's counter to that late in the game was they ran the pick and roll instead of with Trace. They would run it with Grace Thompson, Malik Renew, to where they made sure that Edey was the guy defending the ball screen because they weren't going to hedge with Edey. They were going to play the drop coverage. That's where Indiana's comfortable facing that drop coverage. To where I would expect Indiana to do that more again in the second game, make sure that Edey is the guy defending the ball screen because Purdue's not going to hedge with Edey. They're going to play drop coverage. And Indiana is at their best offensively when they're facing drop coverage. So if they're able to just execute that, which I think they will, for Schifino, who's been a little, what's the right word? Inconsistent with his jump shot. But if he's hitting like he was in the first game and like he was tonight, then you have a viable weapon to pair with Trace Jackson Davis, and you need, the guys around him to play like they did in the first game, which is asking a lot of stuff that Indiana hasn't consistently gotten away from home. But you need Kopp to hit shots. You need Galloway to hit shots. I would say you need Tamar Bates to hit shots, but he hasn't been hitting anything lately, unfortunately. But if they could somehow get him going, that would be huge. If Xavier Johnson comes back, that would be another guy you could run the pick and roll with, and he's, a 37, 38% three-point shooter as well, to where you can say maybe he could hit a couple of jumpers. But Indiana can attack Purdue offensively. I just don't know how well they'll be able to defend them because they're going to go one-on-one with Edey. That's what they did the first time. And no one's going to stop Zach Edey on the post. It's just not going to happen. I mean, there's a reason why he's probably going to win every Player of the Year award. But they got to be able to pressure the guards, force turnovers, make it hard for them to get the ball to Edey. And then on top of it, you can't let a guy like Gillis or a guy like David Jenkins or a guy like Ethan Morton hit a bunch of threes and kill you that way. If Edey's going to get his 25 and 12, you let him get that, but you got to shut everyone else down.
Mm-hmm. So it's going to be very interesting to see how Indiana goes into a fire atmosphere at Mackey Arena on Saturday night. And thank you, Jack, for your time. And I would definitely have you back on during the Big Ten tournament, and looking forward to hearing what your thoughts are.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.